Ammons, didn't we? And if you are a listener of the ZD Experience, you know that the guests that I bring to the show give me some songs, and that was one of the songs that Mr. Damon Fordham submitted. I love the vibe. I love the relaxation vibe of it, and it's appropriate. You know, we got a little bit of a gloomy situation going on outside. The sun is trying to peek through, but we have a little bit of clouds in the way. So that song is actually good, you know, for this day. So Damon Fordham, thanks for being here again.
Why, thank you, Zandrina Dunning. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, yes. And this is number 3. Is this the 3rd time you've been on the show?
To be honest with you, I lost count. But I've been at this station quite a few times.
Oh, yeah. So. Oh, yeah. Between live and local shows, Black History Talks,
right,
and of course the ZD Experience, you've definitely become family to Ohm Radio. So I appreciate you coming out today. And we're going to talk about just the last stuff where we left off last time, pretty much, right?
Right. The last time we talked was in 2022, I believe.
Yeah, that
makes sense. I had just gotten
sense.
back from my first visit from Africa. And I had also done my 4th book, which was the 1895 segregation fight in South Carolina, which tells about how these 6 brave Black leaders, including the legendary Robert Smalls and Thomas Miller, the founder of South Carolina State University, how against all odds they led the fight against the segregation laws being passed by the South Carolina legislature and constitutional convention. And even though they lost by a heavy vote, their struggle inspired the next generation to overturn that. So in the short term, they lost the battle, but in the long term, they won the war. And that's a key message, especially for us today. So today I made my 3rd trip to West Africa, as well as East Africa. I was in Ghana as well as Egypt in November of this year. In fact, I was there during the election, but I voted before I went.
And let's make that clear.
Right. And so I voted. And so I also just finished my 5th book, which is Black Folk Tales and Chronicles of South Carolina, which by all accounts is doing extremely well. It's been flying off the shelves in local bookstores as well as various online resources.
Yeah. You definitely made a name for yourself when it comes to just the ability to educate all people about our history. And I can't say that there's too many as intentional, I'll say, as you are about getting that message out through your writings and your storytelling. I have to ask you, Mr. Fordham, can I call you Mr. Fordham?
Either way.
I'll call you Damon and Mr. Fordham.
Either one.
At this point, I'll call you Mr. Fordham. So when it comes to just the titles and the subject matters, how do you get your creative process together in zeroing in on a particular topic to write about and produce a whole book about?
Well, it's essentially whatever I find interesting and whatever I think will educate and especially inspire other people. You see what I read. I read a whole lot. I've read just about every day of my life since I was probably about 3 or 4 years old. I've always been reading something.
Yeah.
And I often read things that other people don't read. I also go to the libraries and the archives a lot to see what I could find. And when I find something that's really fascinating that I think the public would find interesting and that would inspire them, I take it and then I go on these paper trails to see what else I could find about it, or I find people who are alive when these things happened, or even when I'm in conversations, especially with older people, and they tell me something that I didn't know, I go and do research on it. And so I just try to bring this before the public in a way that the average Jane and the average Joe could understand, because a lot of academians, very few will admit this, but a lot of them really don't know how to speak on a non-academic level to the average person. And that gap is what allows all this charlatanry and fake history that comes on YouTube and TikTok and social media, because the average person has not been taught how to vet that information and cross-reference and use primary sources to tell if the source was correct or not, you see? And so
definitely.
I feel that I have a duty to do that before the public, especially in this dark age that we have right now.
Definitely, definitely. So your motto is the more you learn there is to learn.
That's true, because nobody can go around acting as if they know everything.
Right.
Because you see, in Egypt, one of the places we went to in Egypt, there was the statue of the earliest known philosopher was an Egyptian named Ptah.
Mm.
And during my University of South Carolina days, it was a pretty popular thing to be seen with the teachings of Ptah. And it's 2,000 years before that trinity of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle,
Mm-hmm.
Ptah said, among other things, that do not be proud and arrogant with your knowledge, for women could be because wisdom could be found among women at the millstones.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, even if you're an educated person who has 10 PhDs or whatever, there is somebody out there who, through their experiences, knows something that you do not know.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I would say the second half of the question, but it wasn't really a question. So your motto is the more you learn there is to learn.
Mhm.
What is something new that you recently discovered in your research? We talked about, how you've been reading every day, and you find out new things every day. What's something most recently that you found out that you didn't know?
Well, I found out a lot of things when I was in Africa, for example. We went to a place called the Cavern Church, which was where Mary, Jesus, and Joseph hid out from King Herod. I didn't even know that existed before I went over there, that such a place did exist, along with, having gone into the pyramids for the first time and to see, well, for one thing, I didn't like being in the pyramids because it's very dark and the ceiling is low, and so when you're in there, you just want to get out of there pretty quick.
Wow.
But I learned a lot of amazing stories when I was in Ghana that are central to the people of Ghana. For example, in a lot of their folklore and mythology, they have the story of the giant of Ghana, for which they have a festival for every year, of how this giant, they said, was one of Pharaoh's soldiers during when they were trying to catch Moses and them from leaving Egypt. He failed, and to escape the Pharaoh's wrath, he supposedly came to Ghana, where he helped to fight off these enemy tribes and save these people and build this kingdom. And to this day, there's a kingdom in Ghana that celebrates the festival of the giant of Ghana every year.
Amazing.
And the beautiful thing about when you speak with Africans is the young kids can tell you if their ancestor was a king or a queen, or the various folklore and the various mythologies and so forth of wherever they are. They have this self-assurance of knowing who they are.
Yes.
And it also kind of helps that they're in the majority of their population too. And so I learned a lot about that.
Yeah. So in your travels, you said Egypt, Ghana, Senegal, and more. How did these experiences shape your understanding of African-American history?
Oh, you want me to be here for 6 hours?
I know, right? Condensed version.
All right, I'll try to condense this as much as possible. Well, first of all, I got there through a man named Professor Donald West up at Trident Tech, who organizes these things every year. You see. And what I got to understand, first of all, is a sense of freedom that comes with being in the majority of your country.
Yes.
When we went to this last trip to Accra, which is the capital of Ghana, the people who had gone to Africa for their first time, which was half of the group, the look on their faces when we got off of the plane in Accra and they saw this modern city with these huge multitudes of shades of brown, many wearing traditional clothes, running.
I got chills. I'm getting emotional.
Well, I'm doing my job. So they're sitting there, they're just observing this whole city with skyscrapers and freeways and libraries, museums, and so automobile factories and so forth, run by people who looked like them. And many of these people who were with us were elderly. So when they saw that, it just blew their minds and brought tears to their eyes.
Yeah, what an experience for them.
And I could relate to that because that's how I felt the first time I went into Dakar, which is the capital of Senegal. And I just wish that, everybody can't do that. of
Right,
course.
right, right.
But when you have that experience after growing up in a now, I'm not saying that everybody should leave America or that America sucks or any of that kind of nonsense like that. But what I'm saying is that when you grow up being a minority in a country, and then all of a sudden you go to this place where not only are you in the majority, but you're legitimately running things, it really does something for your spirit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So tell me about, you said it did something for your spirit. Tell me how you've changed since your
Oh,
last
wow.
trip.
Well, I'll tell you, among the other places we went to was the notorious Elmina Castle.
Mm.
And for those who don't know, Elmina Castle was the largest and the oldest of the West African slave ports.
Ooh.
It is a vast place. I mean, it's almost like, I would have said that it's sort of an African Auschwitz, but in a way I would say that Auschwitz is the European Elmina,
Ooh.
because some of the tortures they used on people at the Elmina Castle, which was built in 1482, was the kind of demonic things you would have probably heard about the concentration camps. To give you a brief example of this, there's a dungeon there with a skull and crossbones, which they would take rebellious Africans and put them in that dungeon for 3 days. Why 3 days? Because the human being can go for days without food, but 3 days without water, your body will shut down. So after 3 days, they would take all these Africans and let them out of their cells and watch while they dragged their bodies out of this dungeon as a form of psychological warfare to say, try this and this will happen to you. And that's the kind of thing that they would do to try to keep them from rebelling. So, and we of course went through the door of no return.
Yeah.
I'd been through that in Senegal at Gorée Island.
Yeah.
So I'd already had that experience. So it wasn't as traumatic for me as it was for somebody who had been there for the first time. But I will tell you this. I am of both Senegalese and Ghanaian ancestry through the family DNA. And I know that I have direct and unnamed ancestors that went through those places.
Yeah.
And my takeaway from that is something that I want your viewers and listeners to think about. If these unnamed ancestors 400 or 300 years ago can survive what they did in those places, to where I could come back in 2025 and see these places where these direct ancestors survived, if they could survive so that their multi-generational descendant can come and see these things in our time, what can't we endure and what can't we survive today?
Period.
That's my takeaway.
That should have been at the end, because that's something to close on.
Oh, I have other things that I could close on.
I am sure you do. Oh my goodness! It reminds me when you told me about the experience you had at the door of no return, and can you just reiterate how you felt? And you kind of were taken off your feet in that whole situation.
You mean the first time?
Yes, the
first time. Oh, wow. That was just profound to go through there. And because, see, Gorée Island is a little bit different than Senegal, which is 4,000 miles to the north of Ghana. It's a somewhat different experience in that, number one, when I went to Gorée Island in 2022, that was my first time in Africa.
Yeah.
So I'm really dealing with a whole lot psychologically there, as you well know. And so when I went through that, not only when I saw this, but when I went through that door no return, all I saw in front of me was the Atlantic Ocean, knowing that this was the last thing that my ancestors saw before they went there, before they came over here. Oh, you know, it was overwhelming. There was a young lady from Detroit. Her name was Carol Tucker, and she and I cried in each other's arms. So Joy Dodd, who teaches at Philip Simmons High School, he was with us on that trip, and he is of Asian Indian ancestry, right? So he saw Carol and I and each other crying at the door of no return, and he was feeling somewhat sympathetic. So he walked over to me and he said, Dame, I really wish I could say I know how you feel right now. And I looked at him and I said, you're a human being, aren't you?
Right.
And here's what I mean. And about 2 years later, I spoke before his class and I told that story. And I said this. And I said, what I mean by that is that even though you may not be of African ancestry, I knew Mr. Joseph Engel, who was the survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camps,
Mm.
very well. You know, I've sat at that man's feet and wrote down some of his stories before
Wow.
he passed when he was when he was 92, right?
Mm.
And I don't have to be Jewish to feel empathy
Mm-hmm.
for people who survived the Holocaust.
That's right.
I don't have to be a Native American to have empathy for those who survived the Trail of Tears or the Wounded Knee Massacre or any of those type of things. You see, human suffering is something that is universal.
Yeah.
And as a human being, you do not have to be of a lineage to appreciate the misery of places like that. Because not too long after this, I met a lady from Australia who told me how she cried at the door of no return up at Goree Island. So that's what I'm talking about.
There you go. There you go. So what was his response when you mentioned that? I mean, I hope that allowed him to take a deeper look into.
It did.
Okay.
It
Okay.
did. I mean, he just basically, you know, I could tell from his reaction that he understood. Because, I mean, after all, what could you say after something like that, right? But
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that that was an educational experience for him, and I give him credit because he was the guy who told me about the trip in the first place. So, and he took as much joy with the children over there than I did. While we're on that subject, during that same trip, we were walking through the streets of Dakar, the capital of Senegal, and it was my first morning in Africa. It was May the 11th, 2022, and we were walking through the streets, and this group of school children happened to come by. And so Joy is a big kid himself, basically. So he goes over there and he starts frolicking with them. And so I walk over to them and I say, "Ah, bonjour, mon enfants. Je suis American." And they're like, "American?" And I said, "Oui, Afrique American." And they came up to me and started embracing me. And I literally cried in the streets and said, "My people, I'm home."
Yes.
And I have a picture of that, which is in the book, incidentally. There's a picture of that in the book. And guess what, Zandrina?
What?
That is the first time I have ever told that story with a dry eye.
Ah, wow. Wow. Amazing. So you must have told the story a few times.
Of course. I mean, it was a central moment of my life. I mean, because I think that every Black American dreams of going to Africa and reconnecting with the people.
Yes. Yes.
See, and I did just that.
Yeah. I don't remember if I feel like you told that story before, because I feel like I responded in this way. I have a similar story. Where when I got to Liberia for the first time in 2017, and we got there probably about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Everybody was supposed to be sleeping, but I guess we were a little loud. And the compound where all the kids were staying, it was 44 children. And I don't want to get too much into the backstory as to why we were there, but Save More Kids was the organization. The woman whose mother is an owner of the organization, or the executive director of the organization, adopted 44 kids, and they were all there, and they heard us. We went into the main room, and they walked into the room, and it wasn't a big room. It was a lot of kids, a lot of people in the room, and they just started singing, welcoming us. And I held my phone up, tried to record them, and I couldn't even stand up. I was so overwhelmed with emotion, and just, I felt so at home and understood the natural ability for our people to sing, to harmonize, to have the power of music just fill the room. It felt so beautiful. So I can totally understand where you were coming from when you got emotional, when they embraced you. And just, that feeling of just being welcome in your own, he's showing me the photo now. That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. I would definitely encourage, anybody who can to make a visit to the motherland. It's definitely needed and important for the life that we are living. So I want to talk a little bit about your books. I mean, you got the new book, And congratulations, this is number 5.
Right.
All right. So your books cover everything from folk tales to segregation history. What is one piece of history that you wish more people knew about?
Well, there are a number of things, but I just mentioned earlier the 1895 segregation fight in South Carolina because you see, one of the things I really despise is with these people who, I mean, we understand that lynchings and segregation and slavery are a part of our history.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think it's fallacious for us to dwell entirely on that if that's all there was
Yes.
to our history.
Yes.
Because you see, here's the thing. You have a lot of these people who are mostly on the right wing who only want to deal with the good stuff and the triumph to because they feel that dealing with any of the bad things will turn people into revolutionaries or something, right? Whereas you have these people on the left who only want to deal with the negative things because they feel that that will, quote, wake people up to their oppression. I think they're both dead wrong.
Yeah.
Because you see, if all you focus on are the good things, the people will not know how to deal with it when things are bad because they have no reference point. If all you deal with are the terrible things, you will be frozen in hopelessness because you feel that it would be no point in trying to do anything because you don't see any precedent of where doing anything actually accomplishes something. So that's why I try to achieve a balance in what I write and what I speak so that people will understand that, yes, terrible things happened, but they can be overcome.
Yes, yes. With you being a history instructor, history professor, and with your extensive research, what changes would you like to see in the schools? Because I know that's a lot to unpack. But we know that history is not being taught properly. And I will say Happy Black History Month. I haven't acknowledged that yet. But it's an honor to have you on the first show of February for me, for Black History Month. So thank you for joining me again.
You're welcome.
So let me ask you that question.
Well, first of all, the teachers can't teach what they don't know themselves.
Period.
And what happened with this is that in about 1917 or so, there was a lady named Mildred Rutherford of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And they went on a national crusade to eliminate a lot of these type of things and deal with a very pro-Confederate type history, you see, to justify the losses of their parents, their fathers, and older brothers during the Confederacy and the Civil War. So you had things such as in South Carolina, we had the Mary Sims Oliphant books that were used from 1917 to 1984. And I remember at Moultrie Middle School in 1978 when I was in the 8th grade, it said that, quote, after the war, the Negroes lost their heads and the Ku Klux Klan was formed in Tennessee to bring order back to the South.
Oh my goodness.
But see, I was a weirdo and an unathletic bookworm. And I was in the library in those days reading things like Langston Hughes' Pictorial History of the Negro in America and William Loren Catt's Eyewitness to the Negro in American History. These things were basically my vaccination against the ignorance that I was indoctrinated with in the classroom.
Ooh, come on, Damon.
Therefore, I was protected from that. Plus, my parents were old enough to be my grandparents. So they witnessed a lot of things that the younger parents wouldn't.
Yeah.
So therefore, I got all this information about these things, and these were the type of things that led me into the path that I am now. And when I went to the University of South Carolina, Dean Willie Harriford of the Black Studies Department was the first to let me know that I could make a living off of this. And then down here, Dr. Marvin Delaney at the Avery Institute refined my techniques in all of this. And so here I am today. So the teachers, many teachers don't know these things themselves. So they can't teach what they don't know. Now, what I encourage people to do is this. People often tell me, well, the parents should teach the children. They can't, because these parents now are too young to have known this or experienced this history. They can't teach what they don't know themselves. So what you have to do is this. Take the children to the library and the bookstores, and you ask the reference people for age-appropriate materials for those children. Now, some people will say, well, I learned more from social media than I did. No.
Mm.
Because, see, social media is not vetted. Anybody can put any kind of garbage on social
That's
media
right. That's
that
right.
they want to, and that's often the case.
Yep.
So you might get some ideas from that, but
Mm-hmm.
when you see something, ask somebody to vet it out or vet it out yourself before you go around sharing misinformation.
Write it down and research it for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To give you an example of that, people talk about the Tulsa Massacre, right?
Mm.
Now, most people figure there's the story about how the white people destroyed the black community and that was the end of that and woe was they. Here's the reality behind that. The Tulsa Massacre came from the fact that a young man named Dick Rowland in Tulsa in May 31st, 1921, he was at this Drexel building in Tulsa.
Mm.
He was an elevator operator, and when the elevator went down, a white woman named Sarah Page ran out screaming.
Mm.
And so he was arrested, and the newspaper put out an inflammatory story, said nab Negro who attacked this woman in the elevator. So a group of white men came to the jail to lynch Dick Rowland. But what is not often told was that black World War I veterans, led by Peg Leg Taylor and Obie Mann, went to the jail to try to stop the lynching. And it led to a gun battle between these black World War I veterans and the whites who wanted to do the lynching. So the whites got the upper hand and the blacks retreated into the African American community where they had all these businesses and everything. And so Peg Leg Taylor got up on one of the hills and started shooting them off, right?
Mm.
So they called for more reinforcements, and those reinforcements are what burned down the city, but not without resistance.
Mm.
So after the city was destroyed, there was a black lawyer named Buck Franklin, B.C. Franklin, who sued the city because the mayor wanted to take the burned land to sell it to the white community.
Mm.
And he took the case to the Supreme Court and won.
Wow.
So the black people with funds from the NAACP and black people around the country poured money into the black community. And guess what? They rebuilt Black Tulsa even better than what they had before, so much so that Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois of the NAACP came to Tulsa in 1926 and wrote in the crisis magazine, the NAACP, Black Tulsa, I bow my head. That's the story you're not told. Now, how do I know this? Not only did I read it, but Buck Franklin's grandson, John W. Franklin, I met him when he was down here for the Association for the Study of African American History, Life, and Conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I read his grandfather's autobiography on all of this, and we talked about it.
Amazing. Amazing. It goes without saying for an aspect of things. You started reading when you were, of course, in grade school.
Before that.
I was about to say maybe before
that.
Have you always been this much of a sponge when it comes to just knowing so many facts, so much intricacy within the history? And have you had to continuously look back at certain things repetitively, or does it take one time for you to see something for you to turn around and just recite it or quote it for somebody else?
I never even thought about it. I guess it depends. But to answer the other part of your question, pretty much yes, because number one, I always like to read.
Yeah.
And see, that made me weird as a kid because you see the image that most black people have ingested from the larger society is the idea, and especially with our boys, that we are good at all things physical and nothing mental.
That part.
It is expected that we are good at sports and things like that. But when we are good academically, it comes to as a shock to many people.
Yeah.
Let me give you a recent example of that. We both know Robert Ellington, Papa Robbie, right?
Shout out to him.
Well, he was teaching at Burke School around the time my first books came out. And incidentally, he was a college buddy of mine.
Okay.
And he told his students that I'd written books. And these are black students over at Burke High School. And when he told them that I wrote books, they didn't believe it.
Wow.
Because again, the expectation, if we're black men in our society, is low. They expect us to be good at sports, good at entertainment and things like that.
Yeah.
But in things involving deep thought and education and things of that sort, it's surprising as people when we do well,
Yeah, yeah.
which is very unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, and there's not as many people, like yourself that come forward and are able to talk to those younger generation of kids to give them that role model, that person to look at and say, oh, well, if they can do it, I can too. Because all they've had is the entertainers and the sports athletes, things like that. So I did you go and speak with those kids?
Oh, of course.
Okay,
of course.
perfect.
But not that there's anything wrong with academics or with entertainment.
Right,
athletics.
absolutely.
You're good at what you're good at.
Yep,
as long as
yep.
you're using it toward a constructive ends, there is nothing wrong with that. But on an even more devastating level, right down the street from this radio studio, the Johnson Street Projects. Okay, so in 1998, I was in a youth program with some of those kids there, and we were supposed to bring a black lawyer to speak to them, and he wasn't able to show up. So one little girl, 10 years old, Johnson Street Projects, 1998, told me, quote, "Well, Mr. Fordham, we knew that wasn't going to happen anyway, because all most black men do is go to jail and sell dope anyhow."
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, wait a minute now. See, right now I'm studying for a master's, and I've never done either of those things. And it was difficult for her to comprehend, because you see, the tragedy is what most people see is what they know.
That's right.
And part of that was by design, because let me share something that most of your listeners probably don't know. There's a book called Black Carolinians by I.A. Newby. It was written in 1973, and you can still find it in the library. And it talks about how, in order to maintain a permanent class of cheap labor in South Carolina, which is what segregation was really all about to begin with, it's important to understand that in South Carolina, if you wanted more than what South Carolina State had to offer, the state would pay your way fully to go to any graduate program in the North, so that you would not be here to, quote, stir up the natives. Okay, wow. So the state could maintain that permanent class of uneducated cheap labor. That changed in 1962 when Burke High graduate Harvey Gantt sued, because you see, he wanted to study architecture, and they didn't have programs like that at Morris College or Allen or Benedict or any of the black schools in South Carolina. So they sent him to Iowa State, but he said Iowa is cold, and plus he was smart enough to figure, my parents' tax money pays for Clemson. Why shouldn't I go there?
That's right.
And they went to court, and that's what desegregated Clemson, and that's what ended that program that sent our best and brightest minds of the black community out of South Carolina. So if you have generations of the best and brightest minds being sent out of the state, that explains the condition of the state now.
That's so good.
Because as Booker T. Washington once put it, you cannot put a man in the ditch without getting dirty yourself.
That's right. That's right. Damon, for those of you all who are just joining us on the ZD Experience, I'm here with Damon Fordham, Professor Damon Fordham, and we're here just talking about everything history. Everything history from Senegal to Charleston and beyond. And I want to take a short break. I can't even believe we're at the we're almost at we're past halfway. We got about 15 or so minutes left, but I want to take a short pause just to get a little bit more of the feel for the music that you listen to, because we know, you and I know, that you love music, and I love the suggestions that you send to me, whenever they come to your mind. So I want to ask you now, Damon, what do you want to hear for a short break?
Try Bristol's Way by Junior Walker. I think he's such an underrated saxophonist.
Okay, so you gave me Way Back Home.
Oh, I did?
Yes.
Oh, well, you can use that.
Okay, that's fine. All right. All right, so we're going to take a short break.